It just made me think of that, Anthony. If I don't get to it though, if the audience has questions, I won't.
Alrighty, hello everyone. Sorry, hello. I tried to say everyone and everybody at the same time. Hello everyone. On behalf of ForeSpace, welcome and thanks for joining us as we discuss careers in sustainability with 3 sustainability professionals joining us today with very different careers. They'll all be introduced shortly. This event is part of a week-long series of events on sustainability and the climate crisis brought to you by the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability and the Loyola Sustainability Research Center in collaboration with ForeSpace. For those of you unfamiliar with Concordia University's ForeSpace, we are located in downtown Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, on unceded Indigenous land. We are a university-wide platform focused on working collaboratively with our community across disciplines to activate research, teaching, and initiatives via these kinds of process-based explorations. So we are currently recording this session and live streaming at CU ForeSpace on Facebook. I'll pop those links into the chat in a minute. You're more than welcome to join in the conversation today. In fact, we very much encourage it. So if you have questions throughout, we encourage you to either lift your virtual hand. So you can raise your hand, or you can, if you're more of a texter, you can pop your question into the Q&A box, making our moderator's life, Rebecca Titler, who you just saw, a little bit easier as she navigates the question period. Of course, the chat is activated. That's more for your kind of any comments or reflections, but for the Q&A, please use the Q&A box or lift your hand. Okay, on that note, hopefully I'm not frozen. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you for handling our technological difficulties with such grace. Welcome to everybody. This is a part of this panel is a part of our week-long discussion on sustainability and the climate crisis. This is an event that we hold every year. Normally we hold it as an in-person conference in March, but we have been obviously shut down for the in-person version due to the pandemic. We had this careers panel scheduled for last March 16th. 17th or 18th, anyhow, obviously that didn't happen. So we are very grateful that the panelists who we had registered for last year have agreed to contribute this year as well. I would like to begin quickly by recognizing that we are coming to you live from Tiohtià:ke, which is the unceded land of the Ganankahaga of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. Tiohtià:ke means where the two part ways, in reference to the two communities of Gatnawage and Ganasatake that are still strong in this area to this day. If you would like to know, if you're not in Tiohtià:ke or Montreal and you would like to know whose land you are on and begin an exploration of what that means, you can go to native-lands.ca, and they have a great map as a place for you to start. With that, I will welcome our panelists today. We have Katerina Fragos from PwC, who is the manager of sustainability there, who will be coming to us from more of a corporate perspective. We have Faisal Shennib, who is environmental specialist at facilities management here at Concordia University, so from an institutional perspective. And then we have Anthony Garoufalis-Auger, who is coming to us from more of an NGO perspective. Anthony is a climate emergency organizer and also a board member of the Rapid Decarbonization Group. So welcome to you all three, and thank you so much for being here today. We have decided to run this as a conversation. Typically students and potential professionals in sustainability have a lot of questions for our panelists. So we do, as Anna said, welcome any questions that you might have. But I will start us off with a couple of rounds of questions to kind of set the stage here today. So my first question is, I was wondering if you would each be able to tell us a little bit more about what you do in your various jobs. And maybe we'll start that off with Anthony.
Sure. Yeah, so I work in advocacy and I'm a climate emergency organizer, and I can explain a bit about what that is. But currently I'm on the board of Rapid Decarbonization Group, which so part of my work is to try to get an organization off the ground to be more effective and to get resources to do more effective advocacy. And I also work with an organization called Climate Emergency Unit, which is headed by Seth Klein. an author and a former director of the BC Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. And the work of, I guess, the work that I do and why I say it's climate emergency organizer and not, which is I think different than conventional climate emergency organizer, is that at one point I came to the realization that conventional climate policy, so what the federal government is doing, was insufficient to really address the climate crisis. So, well, I guess, you know, there's a lot of policies that are being discussed in the mainstream. And had they been implemented maybe in the 1990s or the early 2000s, they would have given us a chance to limit warming below like what could potentially be catastrophic, or I would even say apocalyptic planetary warming. And then now we're at a stage in the game where only massive transformation of our economy, of our society, will allow us to limit warming to a relatively safe level. And I came to that realization several years ago, and I'm actually a Concordia student, or was a Concordia student, and that I came across this from research by Professor Damon Matthews. I think gave a panel that or spoke to a webinar on this during this week. So I looked at I came to that realization, and then I looked around what was being done on the issue, and realized that there wasn't a lot of organizations in Canada that were focused on more rapid climate mitigation. So I decided, that basically try to be an advocate for this. So over the years, I've worked on several projects, and I'm trying to build an organization right now that would be able to advocate for this. And I'm working as an organizer, so basically an organizer, and I would kind of just categorize it as being a political entrepreneur. So the idea is, you identify a problem, and then you kind of identify a solution. In this case, would be that the government needs to implement this kind of World War II scale economic mobilization. And then my job is to try to figure out how to build power through relationship building, coalition building, to compel the government to implement these type of policy solutions. So the job of an organizer includes a lot of things. It can include media relations, building relations with journalists, with editors from different newspapers, media outlets, coalition building, communications, developing strategy. And then in my role as with Rapid Decarbonization Group and building an organization, part of my work is everything from grant writing to funder relations, to writing policy and thinking about policy, research, and then also board management and working with volunteers. So that kind of gives you an idea of what the type of work that I'm doing, and I'm working more specifically on projects trying to mobilize different actors within different sectors of the economy. So right now I'm focusing on arts and culture, but to get them activated on the climate emergency and basically get them in emergency mode and get them advocating for these big, large policy changes that are required.
Thank you, Anthony. That sounds really fascinating. Faisal, do you want to pick up and tell us a little bit about what it is that you do?
Absolutely. So my title is environmental specialist. I work at Concordia University. I've been working here since 2010, believe it or not. Many people don't believe it. It's a really, really interesting job. Basically, I studied engineering at Concordia. I was doing a master's. I discovered a whole ecosystem of human beings working on amazing projects at Concordia, sustainability initiatives that were things that I was simply learning about in class in an abstract way. And I got super inspired to get involved because they were really approachable. They were very inclusive. The project was called Sustainable Concordia. And it was in an earlier incarnation of what it is today. And I think it still remains true to that vision of inclusivity and advocacy for change at the institution. And basically they were a group of multi-stakeholder individuals, not just students, but staff and faculty who were working together to change the nature of what the institution was doing in terms of these critical issues. And so some of the individuals there made a case to create a job a couple of jobs actually at the institution. And this is a pattern that we've seen happen at all sorts of universities around North America and the globe, where they see that there needs to be a role or two or three or more. Sometimes you're lucky and you have a big team working towards change in the different sectors of the institution. So mine lands in the operational sector. I focus on how our operations affect the ecology and social justice issues as well now a little bit more, and economic issues. So the whole trifecta of sustainability. More concretely, what I work on principally is waste management projects. It's kind of a pet passion of mine. I really focused on that in the bunch last 10 years because we had amazing traction with certain projects that really differentiated us and created really great involvement opportunities for students. So everything from our composting at the institution, which we actually were some of the first to implement on-site composting and massive organics collection all through the two campuses. In terms of Quebec institutions, we were one of the first. We have a reuse center now, a center where we collect materials and let them pause for people to come and collect them. And we have all sorts of diversion initiatives, including food surplus collection and redistribution, and others. So I'm not going to go through the whole list. There's a lot of stuff happening, and there's always new initiatives popping up. Essentially, my role is to identify opportunities, track our progress, help conduct waste audits, do quality inspections as well on our infrastructure, work with students to take their ideas, or staff or faculty, and try to make them into a reality, try them out, pilot them, and operationalize them if they're good ideas. I often do translating work in terms of trying to translate an idea into business language for the institution. And now increasingly, I'm trying to work back in the direction of reaching out to researchers and teachers more to integrate some of these opportunities more into their class settings and research settings. So that's in a nutshell what I do.
Thanks so much, Faisal.
You're welcome.
Katerina, you want to tell us a little bit about what you do for PwC?
Sure. So my current role is manager within the Sustainability and Climate Change practice at PwC. Some of you may recognize the acronym PwC. It's short for PricewaterhouseCoopers. I know when I was in university, I thought of them predominantly as an audit firm where accounting students went to go work, but they have a broader set of services, general consulting services, and now this emerging sustainability and climate change team. So within our group, we basically help all sorts of profiles of companies, predominantly helping publicly listed companies, but sometimes private companies, sometimes NGOs, sometimes governments, cities, and increasingly ministries are engaging us for our services. And we help them with anything that falls under the umbrella of sustainability. So that might mean something at a high strategic level where they're just looking to figure out, okay, what should we prioritize from a sustainability perspective? What's most material to our sector? Where can we have the greatest impact? So these strategy setting prioritization exercises to enable them to, first of all, determine priorities, helping them to set targets, science-based targets in the context of climate, where possible. And there's a ton of standards that indicate what a robust target is across diversity, across human rights, across all the topics that fall under the broader umbrella of sustainability. So we're kind of doing this strategy setting high level work to support companies. We also do implementation and topic specific work. So we may be hired to do to help write a health and safety policy and guidebook because health and safety falls under the broader umbrella of sustainability, or we might be commissioned to do some work on biodiversity and land use. So sometimes it's topic specific and other times it's at the more higher level of sustainability work. We also help with reporting. So a number of companies that report to different ESG raters like the CDP, which you may have heard of, the Carbon Disclosure Project, or to the RobecoSAM, which is another entity where companies submit long form questionnaires in order to receive a rating. And we help companies with their science-based target submission. So we're helping with disclosures, and we also help companies with their sustainability reports. So a number of public companies that are looking to just aggregate their reporting in alignment with some of the reporting standards that exist, like SASB, SASB, which some of you may be familiar with, or the GRI, and there's a number of other frameworks that exist and or are emerging. So, strategy work, policy work, reporting work, and then a lot of implementation support work. And as I mentioned, the type of client is usually publicly listed company, but there are others. And, all sectors are touched: energy, retail. We do a lot of work actually in food and apparel retail. And we're servicing from our group any organization that's headquartered in Eastern Canada. So Toronto and Montreal predominantly, but some in Halifax, Ottawa, but those are the kind of the main hubs. So that's my work at PwC. I'm also a part-time lecturer at rival University McGill, where I teach a sustainability consulting course in the undergraduate business in the Desautel Business School. So that's my current work.
Thank you so much, Katerina. A couple of you have touched on this a little bit already, but I was wondering if you could follow up with some idea of how you got to where you are. So what was your educational pathway? What were your initial inspirations for getting into this field? If maybe we'll go right back to you, Anthony, to give Katerina a chance to catch her breath. But if you could address that question, that would be great.
Yes, my path really started at university. So when I was an undergrad at Concordia University, I came upon climate change kind of it was always something that interested me, but I was involved in the student movement, and I was invited to speak in the United States as somebody that was kind of very involved in more the Francophone organizing to share my experience. And I was invited to a climate conference there in the United States of divestment groups. This was the first convergence of divestment. If people don't know what divestment is, but it's basically the movement to have universities divest or remove their funds from fossil fuel companies. Then when I got back to Montreal after I spoke there, I started with a few others, one of the first divestment groups. I remember Faisal was actually there at the beginning. And we started the Divest Concordia. And then I started to learn more and more about climate change, and I just decided I was going to specialize in that, primarily because I thought it was an extremely important issue that was being underserviced. And then I actually got involved in the student union at Concordia University. I ran and won election to be the vice president, external mobilization, and it was on a platform related to climate change. So then we had a mandate, and I really recommend people get involved in student organizing, just because there's so much resources and you can actually start building your career in university. From my experience at Concordia Student Union, I built, as the external, I built a lot of relations with environmental groups and with other actors outside the university, and relations that I still have today that proved very useful. And then I guess there was one point where I was kind of in this incremental mindset that, we could incrementally deal with climate change. But it was really as reading more and more, and then also familiarizing myself with the work of Damon Matthews, who works around carbon budgets, and a couple of my friends from divestment group were involved in his climate lab. Actually, we're doing their masters and the PhD there. But I came upon the work about how quickly we needed to move on climate change, and then my whole perspective changed on that. And that's kind of where I decided that this is something that's really underserviced and that nobody's talking about, and I still don't feel like we really, the average Canadian understands the science around this. But I decided that my job should be to try to push to have this more discussed in the mainstream. So then I decided to start a nonprofit, Rapid Decarbonization Group, with a colleague who's studying at Concordia doing his PhD under David Matthews. And and then a whole bunch of opportunities started there. We started working with other organizations. We started helping with other groups that wanted to kind of get into emergency mode, that needed help with public relations, with media relations, with developing their policies. So that's, and then eventually now we're kind of working more to building an organization that would be able to do campaigns and that would have its own budget to do its bigger projects. And then, yes, that's kind of how I got into that. But really it started at university.
Thanks, Anthony. Faisal, you mentioned that you started in engineering. Can you expand on your path a little bit?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I really briefly touched on how I got involved, but essentially I was studying environmental engineering, civil engineering, and I was learning about composting as a remediation technology. So how do you clean up soils, let's say, through composting? Up until that point, I did not know what composting was. So I only learned about it in a textbook. I grew up, sort of in the city, and I guess composting wasn't a thing around at the time. And one day I was walking through the university building, I think leaving a class. I saw a sign in the hall building. That's one of our downtown campus buildings that said, "Plant sale open to all, 13th floor greenhouse." And I was really intrigued and felt, invited because it said open to everyone. So I found my way up there. It was not easy. It was less simple to find the way there than it even is today. But I did manage to find it. And I found a whole community of students working actively to change the world around them, basically applying skills and knowledge, teaching each other concrete actions they could do, and trying to change the culture of the institution as a whole. And their philosophy was intriguing to me because it was inclusive. It wasn't necessarily oppositional. It was about how to get everybody to the table to make change happen. So I thought that was amazing. And that was something I needed right then and there to hear. And I didn't turn back. I went to every single meeting I could since they let me. There were no rules about who could and couldn't come. And I guess I stuck my nose in the business enough that they thought I would be well suited to this job that opened eventually. And I've been working here since then, trying to use some of my, engineering skills and not know-how, but learning all sorts of new competencies as well in the process.
Thanks, Faisal. Katerina, what about you?
Yeah, it seems like it's a consistent theme because my interest in the topic also started in university. So I too studied at Concordia. I was at the John Molson School of Business studying finance, and completed a number of non-sustainability related internships. I was part of the co-op program and was really disillusioned and not at all interested in staying in that space after having interacted with some banks and some pension funds, and at the time they weren't as engaged on the topic as they are today. So was open into exploring other options. So what was interesting was I attended a conference. It was at the time hosted by an organization called JSEC, the John Molson Sustainability Enterprise Committee, or they had another name at the time. They were JSG, but I think now their new name is JSEC, and they've evolved into the Montreal Youth Group. Anyways, JSEC was the acronym at the time, and they had a headline speaker, David Suzuki, who was speaking. And I think that was one of his, I had watched him speak online, and I had watched and read some of his content prior. So I don't think I expected to be as moved as I had been, because I had been primed by his content before, but man, was I moved. Like in that conference, one of the quotes that really stuck with me, and I remember being stunned after I had heard it, was he said that, and probably Anthony, based on a lot of the things you've said already, you probably feel this too. And I definitely feel this, and Faisal, for sure you do too. It's the feeling of, he feels like we're all in a car driving towards a brick wall, but everyone is talking about where they should be sitting in the car. Like we're completely missing the point. Like we're focusing on trivial matters, incrementality, small things, petty arguments amongst friends, when really we have a crisis that's omnipresent, that we need to be dealing with, and we're totally avoiding the issue that's looming and right in front of us. So I remember that was a breakthrough moment for me, like a catalyst, élément déclencheur, like one of these moments where you're kind of like, okay, my life has changed a little bit because of this new perspective. And so I was at the time where I was searching for jobs, and I applied a new filter to my job criteria. I was now looking for companies that had sustainability as part of their values. And so when I was searching for companies to apply for, there were a number that did. I mean, they weren't perfect, and they're still not perfect, but that met my criteria for an organization that values sustainability. So I ended up working at Procter & Gamble, where I started in my career following university. So initially I was working in account management, brand management, and not really tied to sustainability. It was challenging for me to get a role formally in sustainability without creating one. The way both of you seem to have basically created your roles, which I envy. My strategy was more get into a company that values it and then pivot while in. So I had and the opportunity, you know, I was meeting all of my objectives and the things that I needed to do in my current work. So I was able to expand and do some flex work in a sustainability capacity. So we ended up converting 2 of our manufacturing sites to zero waste. We ended up partnering with Walmart and Loblaws on various initiatives to discuss some of the climate related attributes of some of the products. We ended up developing a pro bono consulting project where employees that had specific skills could be paired with local NGOs to offer skills in that area. So, you know, IT people at P&G, supply chain people at P&G, brand experts at P&G could be supporting NGOs pro bono on certain challenges that they had, and it was inspiring for the employees and free support for the NGOs. So we did a number of these employee activations. And that was around the time where I think I hit my ceiling of what I thought I knew. I felt like I couldn't discern between all of the material that exists. There's a lot of literature on the topic. What's good, what's bad, what's a good source, what's not, what's a strong standard, what's not. Like I was having trouble navigating all of this information. So I decided to pursue a part-time master's program. So I did a part-time master's program at the University of Cambridge in sustainability, which helped me a lot to basically build kind of my internal compass. Because I wasn't able to do it on my own, but several people are. Just my case was that I think I needed that. And that's what resulted in me being able to get this position at PwC to work in this space. And I've been working at PwC for 2.5 years or so. So for me, it was really that conference and then picking a company that I knew had alignment and interest in sustainability and slowly pivoting into sustainability and upskilling myself where I saw gaps.
Thanks so much. I have my next question is if you could all tell us about the main challenges of your job. Anthony, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with that. I guess, yeah, there's quite a few challenges. One is that this has never really been attempted, what we're trying to do. So we're not only just calling for a specific policy ask, we're asking the government to completely change the way that it approaches economic planning. So it's a completely different paradigm of policy making. And it's something that's unprecedented since wartime. And I would even argue that it's probably even more difficult than what we've done during the Second World War in terms of how radically we have to change the way the society functions. And it has to be done very rapidly. So that's one of the challenges is how do you compel the government to actually do that? But from there, one of the elements that's absolutely needed is that you have a lot of civil society actors calling for the same thing. So it's not enough that just our organization and a few individuals are calling for this. There needs to be institutions. There needs to be thousands of individuals and institutions calling for the same thing so that it actually pierces into the mainstream. So part of it is that public opinion shifts in that direction. And it's starting to. So I think, what really kind of helped in the last few years was kind of the Greta Thunberg effect and the climate strikes of 2019, and as well as Extinction Rebellion in the UK, which had more of an effect in the UK and Europe than it did in North America. But there was a ripple effect. But basically what happened after 2019 is that public opinion very much shifted towards, a significant part of the population is now alarmed by climate change, about 23%, and that's bigger in the younger generation. But that still needs to continue to grow, and there needs to be more voices calling for that. So the building power element is really important, and that's activating groups. And that's a challenge because it's, there's institutional barriers for groups taking positions. However, like I said, since 2019, there's a lot more individuals within institutions that are kind of in this alarm mode or in emergency mode. And now it's just a matter of finding those individuals. And then the kind of a third challenge I'd say is division. So, yes, you can go into nihilism and you can kind of think that it's absolutely impossible when you kind of acknowledge how big of a transformation needs to be done. But that's not really productive. And I think but a lot of individuals haven't really thought about it. And actually, the majority of Canadians wouldn't be able to name a single kind of climate policy solution. A lot of it is focused around recycling and other types of kind of individual changes. But in terms of policy change, a lot of Canadians are not really familiar with it. But you have to kind of provide a vision of what that can look like. And I find that the war analogy to World War II and what we were able to accomplish during the home front is a very instructive one. But the challenge is to get a lot of people to kind of understand or see that vision and understand how the lessons from that period could be useful. And that's, that's everything from disseminating that idea, because there needs to be a lot of people that are going to be talking about this. And then also just providing that vision is a particular challenge. And then I guess the last one I'll go is funding. Funding is extremely challenging in the advocacy world. Not entirely impossible, but definitely if I had advice, it would be to get better at fundraising. And that's something that I didn't learn until later on. And I wish I had focused on more when I was getting off the ground. But fundraising and receiving funding to do this type of work is not easy. And particularly, we're not a charity, so it's not tax deductible, so there's less of an incentive for people to donate. And also there's less opportunities in terms of foundations that you can actually ask for money for when you're not a charity. But the advantage is that you get to do political advocacy work. You can do 90% or 100% of your work as political advocacy work, whereas if you're a charity, it's only about 10%. However, maybe one challenge now we're trying to do is start actually a charity to be able to do some of the research work that we need to do, so then people can donate to the research side of things, but they're maintaining kind of more of an advocacy nonprofit at the same time. But definitely that's a challenge. If you want to work on this full time, you're going to have to find ways to finance yourself, and unless you're independently wealthy, it's going to require donations and getting good at fundraising, funder relations, and grant writing.
Yeah, thanks, Anthony. Faisal, is that true to your experience? What are your main challenges here at the institution?
Yeah, there's definitely some similar themes. I think the first thing, though, that I'll point out is the typical challenge with higher education institutions, which is, I mean, especially if they're large like Concordia, and kind of pieced together with a lot of different faculties and kind of departments, is that they can feel like a very, very large moving ship that takes a long time to figure out where the helm is and exactly how to get things to move in the direction you need it to. So it's a big culture shift project that has a lot of different cultures that you're trying to get on board to a common vision. And so at Concordia, even though I'd say we had a head start on a lot of universities in terms of our sustainability initiatives, thanks to the forward-looking vision of some individuals and small groups of people, we're still, we could be further. And we've only recently launched an official sustainability plan. So even though I've been, generating initiatives in collaboration with a lot of people over the last 10 years, and people have been doing that before me, and there was formal buy-in at different levels, we have never had an institutional-wide buy-in. So maybe compared to the corporate world, where there's a lot of kind of central control and command, or even a nonprofit, you could probably get your whole nonprofit on board with the vision fairly quickly. The whole university is a very different entity. So yeah, it can sometimes feel like you're buying time for the bigger projects by working on smaller projects that you do have access to make a case and legitimize the whole sustainability project. And then eventually hope that the right players come together and that you've networked enough, built that kind of critical capacity, and then things happen. So yeah, I mean, like, patience is a big virtue here. And I think is one of the reasons why I've been able to see a lot of things through, is because I've actually been in this role for 10 years. So it's not to diminish my abilities or anything, but it's just to say that I have the institutional memory to know what's been tried, what works and what doesn't, and how to keep things moving, even if they get abandoned for a certain amount of time. So that, I would say, is the number one thing. But yeah, then the typical things, like if you know how to fundraise, getting money can make things move faster. Definitely can be a big help.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Faisal. Katerina, what's your experience in the corporate world?
There's one big challenge that is faced daily, and that is ideally we would just help the client move as quickly as we know is necessary. Like that would be, they would agree and everyone would move and resources would be mobilized and they would have contributed or over contributed their share of what needs to be done for us to get to a point where we've handled the crisis. So that ideally they would move quickly. But Faisal seems to be dealing with this as well. Often there's a lot of stakeholder engagement. Okay, there's competing priorities that are taking attention away from climate change as a topic, for example. We have to justify the business case for how this might improve employee retention, how this might improve investor perception, how this might improve, if they have a B2B model, customers coming to them, how this might improve consumer perception. So there's all this positioning to get the company on board. The same way there's positioning for any topic, anytime an investment needs to be made into a project A, project B, project C, right? Like a company's asking for, okay, what are the financials on this? What benefits? Explain to me what the quote unquote business case is before I choose to make this investment. It feels like they're missing the point when they ask us to give them the business case on something so existential. Yet we have to go through the exercise to do that because it's what is needed to mobilize at this time. So that's the biggest challenge. The patience piece being the tension with the urgency piece, and needing to understand that, okay, this is what needs to be done. This is how influence can be done, but hey, we're not moving quick enough. This is the real big challenge. I think it's not just a consulting issue, it's just a general issue in the space when several parties are involved in a decision. And I'm sure, Anthony, this is what you face and why you're so passionate about what you do, because you're trying to mobilize and get people to move quicker. I experience the same tension, and yeah, I don't have a solution other than we keep pushing, we keep trying, we keep persisting. Where we see opportunities to break through and move quicker, we take them. But that's a really big challenge in this space.
So I'm hearing a lot of patience, a lot of fortitude, a lot of stick-to-itiveness, right, for all of you. And I'm also hearing real focus on people skills and networking skills. Do you think that these are the most important skills that you bring to your job to be able to be successful there, or are there other things as well?
I think that's probably one of the most important skills, particularly if you want to work full time and you have your own project. You have to have good people skills, particularly around fundraising. You gotta really build a network and get people to really, believe in the work that you do, to be able to, fundraise, to be able to do these kinds of projects. And that's a lot of people skills. Like, you're not going to really be able to do it on your own. You really need resources. So that's definitely a big skill. But then also as an organizer that needs to build people power and to get organizations to move in and individuals to move in a certain direction. There's persuasion involved. There is, and a lot of it is not just, you can have all the facts, but if you don't work on, I guess, your personality and character, like that, those are two elements that, really, like, that's how you kind of have to sell an idea. So definitely on my path towards the work that I'm doing, I've read quite a lot of books on the topic of relationship building and how to be persuasive. So that's a skill set that I think proved very, very valuable in the work that I do, and probably and something I still need to work on, considering that I have to help with building coalitions and working with all types of different people. So definitely.
Faisal, do you have anything to add there? I know you have great people skills. I work with you.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise, by the way, people only speak super highly about Rebecca and her people skills. So I would add to that, like, creativity is something that you don't really think of as an asset in the sustainability world. But I've found time and time again, like, these little sparks of kind of creative energy and improvisational thinking can really help surmount seemingly impossible obstacles sometimes. It has to do with putting yourselves in other people's shoes and saying crazy ideas when maybe it doesn't seem like the right moment to pitch that idea. It has to do with how you work with people, obviously, creativity, because it's not just about you generating some amazing idea. It's about kind of like going out there and seeing what's out there and then bringing these ideas back and mixing them together and seeing what comes out of that. Because if you're only applying best practices, well, how are you going to make change happen? Like, obviously, the best practices haven't made the change happen enough. I mean, you can look for the best of the best practices and hope to implement them and hope that's what's missing, but that's not always what it is. So there's something to that idea of creative thinking and working in a team in a creative way, and having that that sense of comfort that you build with a group of people to be able to think that way and feel safe to think creatively.
Yeah, agreed. Katerina, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I echo what both Faisal and Anthony have said. And I think there's also a level of knowledge that's required to be effective. So there's, reading that needs to be done there. I think everyone should know how to quantify a carbon footprint, and it's not inaccessible to just, do an online course to figure it out, or to read some of the literature. Like, there's some basic things that you kind of need to understand in order to be able to be effective in that persuasion, right? Like, if you're asked a question and then you kind of don't know how to handle it, right? Because you're not deeply, or at least you're not versed in the topic, it's a bit of a challenge. So I think for me, at least, like, I'm constantly attending webinars, immersed in content, reading reports as they get published. I'm following leaders. And I know, Faisal, you mentioned maybe the solutions aren't within best practices, but sometimes they are. Sometimes the solution's been deployed, there's results for it, it was effective, and it can be, just scaled more broadly by us sharing insights with each other and reading about what other companies are doing, or what governments are doing, or what NGOs are doing, and what's been effective. So I'm constantly trying to pull from what others are doing to then be able to bring the things that have worked. Obviously, creativity required to think of additional items that are context specific, but sometimes there's knowledge to be driven from, other. So I think, yeah, coupled with effective communication is also a specific, there's almost like a requirement. Maybe that's, like, it's kind of implicit, like, you kind of need to be learning as much as you can on the topics in the areas that interest you, so that you can have a certain competency level as well.
Great, thanks. Anna reminds me that we have only 20 minutes left. So if anybody in the audience has any questions, I remind you, you can pop them into the Q&A if you want me to read them out, or you could raise your hand if you'd rather we unmute you, and then you can ask your questions à vive voix with your own voice. So don't be shy. Otherwise, I could sit around the table with these guys with these people for the next 2 hours and continue asking them questions. So I'm going to continue as long as nobody stops me. So my next question is, what do you like best about your job? Anthony, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I guess I find the work exciting. So yeah, there are a lot of challenges, and I don't know where things are going to go. But the projects are very, yeah, they're exciting because they're trying to do something that hasn't really been done before. And it's also, I guess, the challenge. Like, I also like the challenge. So in the fact that we get to be creative, to try different approaches of, like, pressuring government. For the past 2 years, I was involved with Extinction Rebellion, and that involved direct action, civil disobedience, and then also even political lobbying. So as I was part of the external working group, and we got to meet with federal ministers and politicians, and yeah, that was very exciting work, and then proposing specific policy solutions. So I guess that, yeah, I find that there's just so many different, I guess in the work that I'm doing around advocacy, there's just so many different things that you're doing. And I find that a lot of it is exciting, except for a lot of the administrative work. If you're fortunate enough to work with an organization where you don't have to be in a director position and deal with the administrative tasks and board management, and you can just focus on the campaigning, but the administrative work is really it's not the most exciting part of an organization. But the campaigning work is actually a lot of fun. You get to work with a lot of great people, and you get yourself out of your comfort zone, which I definitely did in the past couple of years. So yeah, I find that it's a very exciting work, and I really recommend people to try. If they're interested in advocacy and they have their own idea, to really try to go for it, and because it's very rewarding.
And so what about you?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of space to define I mean, it depends on the institution you're in and the culture, but for me, there was a lot of space to define my role and how it was approached. And I think it might have taken on the flavor of my personality to some degree. But I definitely had to like adapt to requirements and things we had to generate, and, you know, like government like audits we had to conduct and stuff like that, and reporting that we do. So yeah, I mean, like my daily activities can be quite varied depending on, you know, what the goals are that are set that year. And, you know, in this month, I mean, I could be doing a lot of computer work. I could be walking around assessing waste bins. I could be joining, you know, brainstorming meetings. It's pretty diverse. Working at an institution, a university, also has a lot of perks. Usually you end up getting tuition covered if you want to go back to school. And so I decided to do that. So I get to, you know, work and study at the same time. That's really great. The types of people around you are, there's a whole diversity of human beings at an institution like Concordia University, whether it's people studying or working there. And I literally get to work with everyone at the university. I mean, I didn't meet them all right away, but you have to meet everybody eventually, because you need to literally go into every space to understand how they're set up and what they're doing currently, what are their practices. I'm going to be talking to them all about their procurement practices, not only how they dispose of waste, but what kind of stuff they're buying. We're going to be doing energy audits eventually. I mean, I think we've already been doing this to some degree. So there's a lot of interacting with a lot of different kinds of people. And if you're a people person, that's great. If not, I mean, maybe you hire somebody to do that for you, or you try to get someone on your team like that. That's it.
Thanks, Faisal. Katerina, what about you?
My favorite thing is the fact that there's alignment in my value set and what I do. So I don't know if it was Lao Tzu or Confucius, but there's a saying where like what you think is aligned with what you say is aligned with what you do, and when that's in perfect harmony, happiness is achieved. So I think the way like working in a manner that aligns with what's most important to me is a very enriching part of my life. I can just imagine if I, you know, was working with the intent to just generate an income to be able to be self-sufficient rather than feeling like I'm contributing to some greater purpose, something bigger than me, I would not be nearly as energized to be doing, first of all, the amount of hours. Second of all, all this extra reading and to be able to immerse myself in the topic, there wouldn't be that level of motivation. So I think it's just the opportunity to be working on something that's really important, both personally to myself, but I think also to all of us. Is a very amazing part of the job, and any job in sustainability.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you so much. We have a question from the audience. Ray, do you want to unmute yourself and you can ask your question live?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I wanted to feel into this question. I was wondering, how do you all remain anchored, or do you feel that you're anchored to grassroots efforts for sustainability? I'm thinking racial eco-justice. How do you stay connected to the groups that are facing the most intense threats now, while still doing the work, you know, in the bureaucratic world?
Should we go in the usual order?
Not at once. Okay. Hello?
Anthony, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. Yeah, so that's definitely a constant challenge. I find that the work that I'm doing, particularly around, so I mean, it depends on the policy area, but particularly around how quickly Canada needs to move and what their effort needs to be, is grounded in kind of a climate justice lens. And a lot of the critiques that are made, but from groups and even nations in the global south, about determining what level of contribution Canada should be doing to reducing its greenhouse gas emissions. So being cognizant of, you know, these voices is very important to the work that I do, and to just my own values of making sure that equity is respected, etc. So that's one element of it, but that's more on the policy side, to just be cognizant that there's a lot of work that's being done around adding equity lenses, gender equity, and just, yeah, the differences between global south and global north in the way that you look at your policy work. So just when you're doing the kind of not the boring, I actually find it kind of exciting, but the work of developing policy and thinking about an issue. It's to be cognizant of that. But then when you're doing kind of grassroots work, yeah, then that definitely is something that you have to constantly be working at, on building relationships with other organizations, listening, and not taking the forefront, but basically putting voices forward and exchanging information. And just from my experience with Extinction Rebellion Quebec and Extinction Rebellion generally, was a critique that was made early on, and it's a valid one, is that the Extinction Rebellion was very much a middle-class white organization as it started off. I would say that they've done efforts that include kind of a climate justice lens and even a class lens in the work that they do, but that took quite a long time it took a while for the organization to adjust to that. And it was particularly a challenge within Extinction Rebellion because it's just organizationally, it's a very decentralized, it has a very decentralized structure made up of a whole bunch of different working groups, and they try to move the organization in one direction, or try to get all the working groups aligned around doing solidarity work. It was and still is a challenge. But yeah, that's something that I think is very important to address, and to work towards building stronger solidarities with better organizations. And there is, I believe it's called the Climate Mobilization Hub, but it's a group based in Montreal that provides workshops and also provides support for climate organizations doing solidarity work, and trying to work with, kind of an intersectional approach to highlight environmental racism and to highlight the voices and the work highlight the voices and work with groups that are at the front lines and that are being impacted currently by government policy. So I think, it's important to the work that I do, and it's something that I'm trying to keep improving on, acknowledging that it's not perfect at the moment.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, Ray, the answer is how do we stay connected? I mean, the fact of the matter is that let's say my team at Concordia that works on waste management, we call ourselves Zero Waste Concordia. We are not connected enough. That's the flat out answer. And we're aware that we need to be more connected, and we've been having conversations about that, and we've started meeting different folks to help guide us a little bit. And make the space and time to work on that actively. So we had our first meetings with the Office of Indigenous Directions, and the Black Directions Office as well. These things are kind of they're definitely slow moving right now, and they need to move a lot faster. So I guess I just put the question back to you: is what should we do? I mean, what do you have any suggestions? I mean, we're basically creating this space, this working group that we're going to start using to actively educate the community on social justice issues relating to waste management through our Instagram account. So we, the last, 4 months of the material we've had have had a lot of topics that we wouldn't have covered before, but we need to cover more. And we need to connect with more groups, other groups that are working actively on this, and showcase the work they're doing and the lenses they have. But yeah, we're still definitely missing the knowledge, and we're missing kind of the investment in it. So we're working on it, but it's not there yet.
I can also add, I see there was a Ray responded in the chat saying, hire me and pay my tuition. So you have your next steps.
Perfect. Okay, we'll be in touch, Ray.
I can add what we I don't think what we're doing today at PwC is perfect, especially I think consultants in general get the rap that they sit in their ivory towers and are disconnected from what's happening in the grassroots, probably more than Anthony, who's on the front lines fighting for policy change, and Faisal, who's connected to students in different faculties. I think consultants are probably the ones that are the most ridiculed, I would say. But I think at PwC, the way we handle this and the way we do this well, but obviously to be enhanced is, so let's say we're hired, for example, by a telecom company. So we're supporting a Montreal-based telecom company, hypothetically. A huge part of us helping them determine their priorities is usually a 3 to 6 month stakeholder engagement process, where we work with them to define, okay, who are the stakeholders that you touch through your business? Okay, who are the main suppliers? Perfect, let's annotate them. Who are the main investors? Okay, perfect, got it. Who are the main customers? Perfect, got it. Okay, now which areas do you have telecom towers? So which indigenous peoples are touched by your operations? Which communities do you have the most assets in? Okay, perfect. And we get contacts for all of those different, first of all, government, communities, sometimes, and also NGOs that they interact with, but also that they're getting heat from. We need to understand all of the inputs from all of those stakeholders to then be able to figure out, okay, what matters most to stakeholders, not shareholders, stakeholders, inclusive of all of these groups that I mentioned. And so there's an exercise of interviews, conversations, sometimes depending on the mandate and the client's need, there's ethnography involved where we're like sitting with the stakeholders over an extended period of time to really understand. Like sometimes an hour conversation can't extract the so what, the why, and what's the situation. So sometimes it's a lighter touch exercise where it's a survey, nowhere near as deep as understanding when you're actually spending the time. Like all of this varies depending on the client's mandate, depending on the client's needs. And also, I mean, we can't force a client to do something, right? They come to us with a request, we can influence, but we're ultimately there to provide a service that they'd like. So we execute and we work with them to uncover and understand the needs of their stakeholders and to roll it up in a manner that can inform some sort of decision making that maximizes utility for all. So this is like ideal state, right? Like this doesn't always happen this way. Sometimes it's lighter touch. Sometimes, like you brought up, sometimes key stakeholders, important stakeholders are excluded from these dialogues. And that's not right, but it does happen. So our role as consultants is to try to make sure we bring all of the right people to the table by asking the right questions. Well, where do you operate? Okay, that's important. Like you can't just conveniently exclude an organization that's touched by your assets. Okay, which populations do you serve? Why do you not serve some other ones? Can we bring them into the discussion? So that's one way that we do that. Another way that we do it is, I mean, I think, and this is my thinking, curious to hear others' thoughts. To be able to serve diverse communities, you need to hire a diverse set of people. And so diversity in the context, sure, physical diversity, mental diversity, there's, we usually align to the way the Canadian government defines diversity. So they have disability, they have gender, they have minority, Indigenous, and so they have their kind of classifications, although there are other definitions. And I don't know if Concordia has its own definition of what, but anyway, so we do a lot of diversity and inclusion action planning at the recruitment level. How do you improve targeting? How do you have some sort of blind CV screening, having some sort of, okay, at least minority gender in the candidate room for final interview. So there's several tactics that have been deployed depending on the diversity group that's, number one, just being excluded at the outset, very upstream in the recruitment process, and then creating inclusivity once in the organization. So we also support clients that are trying to just build diversity and inclusion efforts with, or inclusion and diversity, recently they've been swapped, so inclusion and diversity within their organization, such that they can be better positioned to empathize and to develop programs and solutions for the communities and the consumers and the people that they touch. So that's it's not perfect. It's not, but it's attempting to think through grassroots and think through vulnerable people in the development of sustainability strategies and approaches.
Thanks so much, Katerina. I know that you have to run exactly at the 3 because you have another meeting. So I'll maybe ask you the last question very, very quickly. What would you recommend to soon graduating students in terms of a job search? Have you noticed an increase in jobs related to sustainability? You can give a really
there is an
fast
increase in jobs, certainly. Just from LinkedIn as my proxy, I keep getting notified for all sorts of new jobs I wasn't previously notified. So there seems to be an uptick. I can't tell you the numbers though, but my general sense is there's an uptick, which is a good sign. The thing that worked for me, so I'm obviously biased because it was effective in my trajectory, was identifying an organization that aligns with your value sets. And no matter what you studied, say you studied geography, say you studied finance like I did, say you've studied the arts, whatever it is that you've studied, you obviously have a competency academically for that area. And so you're attending this webinar, so you obviously have an interest in sustainability. Finding an organization that aligns to the value set that enables you to work with your competencies so that you can slowly integrate sustainability into your work or shift to another department, i.e. the sustainability department, is something that I would recommend.
Thanks so much, Katerina.
I'm off, thank you.
Thank you so much for participating. We'll stick around and let Anthony and Faisal answer this last question. But in the meantime, thank you for your participation, Katerina. And Ray, I didn't have a chance to thank you for your really apt question. I really appreciate that. And also Tanya for your question about career, about the job search, really important. So Anthony and Faisal, do you have any parting words, advice for a graduating student on the job market or soon to be on the job market before we wrap it up?
Yeah, so I guess it's not so much if you're about to graduate, it might be a little bit more difficult, but I would really propose that, if you want to get a career in advocacy, start in university. Concordia University has probably more resources for students than almost any in Canada in terms of funding that your projects can get. Support from groups like QPIRG, Concordia, where you can start a working group on a particular advocacy topic that you're interested in, and you can get up to $5,000, which is quite a lot because you can pay for tools like GrantStation that allows you to see what grants are available, and you can really start building an organization while you're in university. And I find just kind of what I've noticed in my time as a student in university is a lot of times we're very much focused inwards. But you don't have to be. You can actually start groups that focus outwards on federal policy, on provincial policy, or wherever else. And you can do that from university, and you can find great people to work with and make great contacts within university if you start something off and you advertise it properly and get other people involved. But you have such a great wealth of resources at Concordia, and even in terms of help getting it off the ground. There's workshops and organizations just dedicated to helping you start an organization at Concordia University. So I would definitely recommend getting a head start and working on what you're passionate about, starting in university and building something up rather than waiting till later when you have to find when you're in the job market, and then it's a little bit more difficult to start building something because your time is being taken up by other projects.
Thanks so much, Anthony. How about you, Faisal? Any parting
You know
advice?
what? I think Katerina and Anthony covered it pretty much. I mean, I do think there is an uptake. Just to reinforce an uptick, I'll reinforce what Katerina is saying. I see on LinkedIn a lot more job opportunities with the word sustainability and environmental in all sorts of industries and sectors. So you're not going to be you don't need to make your job as much as before you might have had to, but you still can. I think what Anthony is saying is absolutely true. University is the right time to really dig in and experiment and get some internship funding to do something really cool with a student group or meet like-minded people and start a startup oriented towards sustainability in District 3. You've got a lot of options, so don't be shy.
Thanks so much. So with that, we are out of time. We've gone over time a little bit. Thank you to our audience members for sticking with us. And thank you to Anthony and Faisal and Katerina, who unfortunately had to leave early, but we could not have had this session without your participation. I really, really appreciate it. I really run this to help make my job easier because students come to me all the time and say, what can I do with, a minor in sustainability studies, or what can I do as a career in sustainability studies? And I can only tell people about my path. So I appreciate you all sharing your paths and your expertise with us today. I'd like to thank ForSpace as well, Anna and Doug, for holding us together this whole week with their amazing work. The Loyola Sustainability Research Center and the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability, and all of our partner organizations at Concordia, which are listed on the webpage. I hope that you will come back in an hour. We have Yvette Perfecto coming, and she will talk about shade-grown coffee. Tomorrow morning, we will have a living lab section that will talk about how we can use Concordia University and Montreal as living lab space to come up with ideas and solutions to a better future city. for Montreal and cities worldwide. And then we will have a panel on urban sprawl. We will close our week of discussion with a fun Jeopardy session tomorrow afternoon. If you want to come and learn more about climate change and test your knowledge, please do join us. Anna has put the link to the rest of the events of the week in the chat. Thank you, Anna. And we will also be posting recordings to everything that has transpired this week and will be transpiring on the ForceSpace YouTube and their Facebook page, but also we'll be posting the links to the YouTube on the conference or on the event page. So do check that out if you want to check back and recall, you know, the information and the conversations that we have, or if you want to share them with somebody who couldn't make it, that would be great. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Anna. Thank you all so much for being here today.
I'm just going to wave goodbye because you said it all, Rebecca. Thanks so much, Faisal and Anthony, for your time. We really appreciate it, really very much. And so do the students or the folks who have joined us here today, as we can tell by the comments coming in now. So thanks. Have a great rest of your afternoon, and we hope to catch up again soon. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.